give Du Bois a hand. So today I'm going to start off with Du Bois and the human rights agenda, which should be, hopefully, you'll find it an interesting talk. Now I want to start off with a quote by Dr. Bobby E. Wright, just to set up the framework of what we're dealing with. And basically he says that there's a belief that psychopaths do not know the difference between right and wrong, but he says that's not the case. Actually, they ignore it. And then he concludes by saying, by ignoring this trait in the white race, lack of ethical and moral development, blacks have made and are still making a tragic mistake in basing worldwide black liberation movement on moral suasion. He says it is pathological for blacks to keep attempting to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality where race is the variable. So this is just to put it in the context of those who are striving for human rights. Who is your audience? Who are you speaking to, and why? So with a brief outline of the talk, I would like to deal with a brief retrospective of black people in the United States discussing human rights with a few selected antecedents and contemporaries of Du Bois. We'll start off with Phyllis Wheatley, who was the very first black person to be published in the United States, actually prior to it even becoming the United States. David Walker, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Max Yergin, and then we come to Du Bois, William L. Patterson, and then Malcolm X. And we're going to go through them briefly, and then we're going to focus on Du Bois' An Appeal to the World, which was a statement on the denial of human rights to minorities in the case of citizens of Negro descent in the United States of America, and an appeal to the United Nations for redress. And this is what we saw the development of the human rights struggle up to approaching the United Nations. So we start off with Phyllis Wheatley, writing in 1774. Again, this is before the United States were even the United States. There were the 13 colonies. And at this point in time, you had people who, especially Phyllis Wheatley, who was trying to use this idea that black people are indeed human beings, because the dehumanization process was such that it was said that black people, African people, were not human beings. So she said, in every human breast, God has implanted a principle which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance. I will assert that the same principle lives in us, referring to black people, that we also have a love of freedom, that we are indeed human beings. We come to David Walker, an abolitionist, writer, and anti-slavery activist. He said, have you not Americans, having subjected us under you, added to these miseries by insulting us and telling us to our face because we are helpless that we are not of the human family? Again, this was the state of the discourse at this point in time. We're talking about 1829, 1830, thereabout. He says, oh, how can those enemies but say that we and our children are not of the human family, but were made by our Creator to be an inheritance to them and theirs forever? So again, this was the discourse on human rights, just to even assert that we are indeed human beings. We come to Frederick Douglass, a social reformer, abolitionist, orator, and statesman, writing in 1854. Again, this is before the Civil War, where he says, he says, they are the rulers of the country, the masters. The Africans are the slaves, the proscribed portion of the people. And precisely in proportion as the truth of human brotherhood gets recognition, will be the freedom and elevation in this country of persons of African descent. Again, this was the discourse that, look, we are human beings, we belong to the human brotherhood. We come to Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was a human rights anti-lynching crusader, and she said, lawbreakers must be made to know that human life is sacred, and that every citizen of this country is first a citizen of the United States, and secondly a citizen of the state in which he belongs. And she was an anti-lynching crusader because at this point in time, a black person walking down the street would be subject to being lynched. Anyone who is uppity would be subject to being lynched in prison, and so forth and so on. So this is what she was fighting against. Again, just our right to human life. We come to Max Yergin. Now, Max Yergin, many may not know this name, but he was